Hi, and thanks for tuning in to this series of discussions we're having here about College Park's big development. It used to be called Airport City. It's freshly minted, newly named 6 West. This presentation is going to talk to you a little bit about that name and the overall project. My name is Michelle Alexander. I serve as your city planner here in City Hall. I report to the city manager, and I serve at the pleasure of your elected officials, council, and mayor. Of course, we had planned to meet in person and have a series of meetings around town face-to-face about this development. We have this very unusual time right now, and so we know that there's some of us for whom it's extraordinarily difficult, and our hearts go out to you. But we're glad and we're really fortunate we have all these other ways that we can communicate, and we can still have a real conversation, even if it's through digital tools. We're going to have 3 events. So first is this video. It's an orientation. We're going to have another interactive event on the web, and we'll get some of your input from there. And then we're going to have an interactive live event, just like City Council's been holding with your regular meetings, where you can tune in and interact with us live. We'll present all of this, how you can participate, and we'll have all of these instructions on your webpage. So come check us out, www.collegeparkga.com. And tell your friends, tell your neighbors to tune in to us. So let's get started with the Airport Cities, what used to be called Airport City. See, even I will adjust. It's newly minted 6 West. Let's start the discussion. I wanted to start off with a visioning process, actually. So what you see here is a way to imagine our future together. So you know when you get off the MARTA station here at College Park, it's going to be newly enhanced. There might be public art. You'll be walking down the street where you already know all your familiar restaurants. And then you'll walk up Columbia. Now just imagine Columbia Avenue now completely newly improved with landscaping, gorgeous art, new streets and businesses all along it. Imagine walking along, maybe you stop for veggies at a farmer's market, maybe there's an artist market. You might be headed to our new Performing Arts Center, imagine that. Or maybe you're going to keep going west along Columbia and you head to the golf course. It's also going to be enhanced, it may be a little reconfigured. Imagine spending the day in this part of your new, newly expanded, if you will, College Park. You'll come around full circle and maybe head back down and have a glass of wine at one of your known existing restaurants. Have a glass of wine and see the planes overhead. That kind of visioning and this kind of imagining is what this is all about. What's your vision? What can you picture happening on the streets that used to be the bio area, and now you're working with your city leadership to make a new space and new places and new memories? So let me tee us up and do a little background. We're going to go who, what, when, and where. And I'm going to start off by just an orientation really about where. So first we're looking at an aerial, and it shows you this forested area that was once former neighborhoods. It's west of Main Street near the elementary school, and it's boundaried by our community golf course. To put this in context, on this slide, you see a black boundary. That's the city boundary of College Park. And in the middle, there's this sort of reverse L shape. That little red shape kind of looks like a puzzle piece. It's red. And that big boundary is our area, 6 West, formerly the buyout area. It's over 300 acres, so it's really large. It's a great development site. It's got incredible access through Camp Creek Parkway, and it's an easy walk from the MARTA station. So now keep in mind that little red puzzle piece, and we're going to zoom in. So there's that shape, and now we're going to move in. I'm going to switch the slides, and we're focusing into a configuration of our streets that are already there. It's a street map. It's got some color on it. The color is actually our zoning. The current zoning. Zoning is the rules that regulate what's allowed to be built or used on a site. What I wanted to show are the streets too. As you can see, we have the 6 streets going west. The name 6 West brings, it's an homage to our 6 streets that create this walkable grid. It already exists. It's just inviting us to imagine a whole new neighborhood, a whole new set of amenities, stores, shops, and working places. So it's inviting us to think also about trails and things like commercial, retail, like I was saying, offices, and all of these things that will help our city grow and we all can enjoy. Well, hopefully I've oriented you geographically by this discussion, but you know, where is intimately related to who. And I wanted to highlight and recognize the many families that have moved or were impacted by the buyout all those years ago. You may be aware that neighbors continue to be neighbors today, even though they live on different streets. There's an annual event where hundreds of neighbors get together and celebrate. In fact, this year is going to celebrate 20 years of getting together. One of your neighbors shared with us her thoughts about how the community was actually much more like a family, how you've stayed in touch, and how the children felt like they had this area of neighborhood fathers and mothers all throughout the area, and how even though, she says, our old neighborhood is gone, our spirit lives on in unity. And I think this is just important to recognize that whatever happens here, this new development, this development along these legacy streets really needs to be something special and something uniquely College Park. So we talked a little bit about the where. The who, of course, is revisiting our neighbors. I just wanted you to capture, to see hundreds of people gathering. We found wherever we could. It might have been a parking lot or maybe the GICC, right? And we're now imagining together new places that we can get together and have our parties and our events. The who is also the College Park community, in the sense that the city owns this property now. It's over 320 acres, I think I mentioned that. So the authority that manages the real estate there makes the decisions about our contracts, leases, and any property that we sell. It's called the Business and Industrial Development Authority. We call it BIDA. BIDA is a little easier than the mouthful I just walked through. Of course, there's your mayor and city council. They are the elected officials who decide all your policy, the zoning, and they're also discussing what level of public infrastructure and investment you want to make as you build out westward from Main Street. The private sector, none of this is going to get built without the private sector. In fact, BIDA and your elected officials are already seeking partnerships with development, the private sector developers and investors. On top of that, you've got a team of architects, engineers, a team of consultants that are advising your boards and serving you by coming up with the different concepts, understanding what's possible in the area, studying the market, studying the earth, the topography, and the hydrology of what can actually get constructed in this area. And they've been working with the community leadership actually since last spring. By that I mean your Main Street board and others, so you might recognize some of them in these pictures. Again, to see the results of all the work that's done to date, I do invite you to check our webpage. I'm going to say it again, www.collegeparkga.com. So we've talked about where, we've talked about who. Let's get to the what of the matter. It's pretty simple in words. We're talking about a master plan. We want to build something. We want to build a fantastic commercial mixed-use center. That's pretty simple to talk about, but that's one reason you have consultants giving you technical advice, because you have some real constraints. And of course, one of the biggest is because of where the flight path is of the planes overhead, they make so much noise. That's why we have the buyout area. It's not suitable for residential habitation. So in fact, there's only a small area of this overall site that allows residential to be built. So that's one of the constraints that's already given to us. It's sort of dictated already by the area. Other constraints, of course, will have to do with the market, what will be supported, and these other aspects about what makes any new development viable over time. So we'll talk even more about how the area could be organized based on some of your preferences, but in general terms, the consulting team helped us diagram where residential could be located, so you see that yellow area on the screen. And of course, they marked out where you already have our existing golf course. They also looked at how the market could support commercial entertainment, maybe recreation surrounding the golf course. And of course, knowing how vital, how important it is to support our Main Street businesses, you see that blue area west of Main Street. So that has to stay lower scale. It's got to be more at the neighborhood scale, and it's got to maintain our look and character of historic College Park. That could really be complemented by other kinds of retail, services, and office. So that's the general blue area. Most important, however, is how our public spaces are going to be developed. That is, what kind of parks, trails, the places we can play, meet, eat, experience. One way to imagine that is this picture. It sketches in a potential way a different layout of uses. So it's a concept. It's not etched in stone. It's a concept that's sketched out, and this is what the community, all of us need to help refine with some specific details. Those details that are being worked out, like traffic, very important, right? Our traffic impact. And so we have a traffic engineer right now had put together a document about how the roads need to accommodate access to the area. We need to really focus in on infrastructure. So you have a team of engineers advising the city and advising you about that, especially to link to the site through MARTA. MARTA's critical to this. How can we reduce the number of cars that are coming here? Let's take advantage of MARTA. Let's take advantage of the SkyTrain. You can imagine over time linking an extension of the SkyTrain right into the center. Also, a pedestrian bridge. How do we tie the convention center to this area? Well, there's a bridge that's under design. That's actually, your city has already designed it. We're seeking funding for it right now from the Atlanta Regional Commission. And that would tie to downtown, and it'll make an easy way to access the overall area. So we've touched on who, what, where. Let's talk a little bit about when. You all as a city, as a community, you've been planning for a good 10 years now. Since 2011, you've been working to put together a vision. How should this area develop? You've been supported by our sister cities and the counties through an organization. It's called the Aerotropolis Alliance. And the Alliance got together with all our sister cities and we said, how do we want the future to be here? How do we take advantage in South Metro and really shine? From that exercise in 2016, it really took off. Your elected officials in last spring in 2019, they hired a team of consultants and they really worked through to think about a blueprint for a concept here, especially to look at what kind of infrastructure is needed and how to work with with the private sector. So where we are today in this old timeline of when is having the community discussion, though, because in order to be viable, it's got to make sense for you all. And in order to get support for it, it has to be something that you believe in and you want to see happen. The next steps in the future is to work with private investors, and then let's build it, College Park. So now, this part of the presentation gets to the reason you're really here and joining us today. We've got to get into the details. Taking that concept and give it some meat, put some details to it so that the city can tell the developers and our city engineers what you really want built here. Remember at the beginning I talked to you about imagining this really fabulous place. And the master plan offers this vision statement about a future of a global city, both for visitors and our community. And we need to know, does that even resonate with you? What needs to be added? What would you like to imagine? What's your vision for this area? To help you think about those things, the approach that we discussed with you is about placemaking, the idea of development opportunities, green space, trails. And you see that term multimodal connectivity. That just means transportation for all modes, whether you're biking, walking, cars, transit, shuttles, bus, multi-modes of getting around, and that kind of idea of connectivity that we need. So the concept talked about some of the development opportunities. What's possible? What does the market support? And you see on the right-hand side some of the uses that are considered for developing in this area. And hopefully that makes sense, that we really want to have cultural places as well as retail and commercial and office. I zoomed in a little bit here for you on this slide because to me this is the most exciting part, where you think about public spaces, where we celebrate who we are, our culture, places where young and old can play, can have areas for entertainment, whether there's rock climbing walls, maybe some kind of experiential, you know, these outdoor experiences, rock climbing, walls like that. All of these are options. And the question, though, is what makes sense to you? What would you like to see in these areas? The master plan also has some options for thinking about green space and trails and how we connect our green spaces and make them accessible and usable. I like the idea of thinking about a 5K. These are events, right, where we get together. Sometimes it's for raising money for nonprofits. Sometimes it's to organize and have competitions. But if you build it with intention, a 5K within our own community can really be something special and fabulous. I love looking at this slide to think about. On the bottom, you see a major lawn, some great lawn space. Maybe there's an amphitheater. A lot of communities are using amphitheaters. Something intimate, not huge, but the right size for our community where we can have music events or performances. We're going to come back to these options at the end of this whole presentation and ask you things that you'd like to see. I mentioned multimodal connectivity. All of this stuff has to be planned, these new connections, these new ways to get around. Maybe we need to expand the SkyTrain, which I mentioned earlier, to bring it interior to our site. That's a long-range project, of course, but you've got to plan it for it to eventually be built. Similarly, we talked about a 5K, some kind of trail system, but most importantly, I really see how do we connect to the MARTA station, make sure we have not as many cars, but really can rely on other ways to get into our community. And this is a pretty picture, one way to imagine this concept of what the development could look like. And we want to use the talents of a consultant team to help us draw our own pictures and fill in the way you can imagine it. One piece of that multimodal is the roads, right? But roads, you can't just build a road. It's got to be inviting. It's got to be special. So early in the presentation, I talked about Columbia Avenue. Remember, that's one of the 6 west streets that form our fantastic grid coming from the MARTA station. Well, imagine having these wide boulevards and a way to make it not just a street that has our businesses and places to shop, but also just a great experience, people watching and enjoying ourselves. So that was an idea of thinking about how we get into the details. Now we got to talk about the next steps. What are the concrete action items? Well, the big view of this is that we're having this discussion first and foremost. We're going to get a lot of input from you, we hope. We're asking you to send us your thoughts and comments. We're going to develop some design standards, some actual rules about how the development has to happen as we zoom in on the different districts of this overall site. We're going to present all of these ideas back to you. We're going to have to go through a process that's called the Development of Regional Impact, DRI. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a next slide. But then we're also going to have to work with our private sector partners about how we're going to deliver all this infrastructure. I talked about viability, and that's really that sweet spot. The market might support it, but maybe the community doesn't want it. Maybe the community wants it, but the market isn't really ready for it. And then, of course, whatever it is, what we want to build here, we have to figure out the financing. So all of these things have to come together so the project's viable and is successful over time. I mentioned development of regional impact. This is a process that the regional agencies provide so that any infrastructure that's going to be as big as this one intends to be or is promising to be, that the impacts we're prepared for through the roads and different infrastructure. So the Georgia Department of Transportation, the Atlanta Regional Commission, MARTA, all of our partners at this regional and even state level, they're not going to let us move forward unless we have it figured out that we have all of this infrastructure. So that's one step that we're in the middle of. I mentioned earlier we have a consultant who's doing the engineering and the traffic and transportation, and they're working with the regional agencies to make sure we have proper infrastructure to handle this plan. I mentioned the connectivity. That will be some of the details. And from that concept, we're going to lay out some of the exact roads. As a matter of fact, 2 new roads are planned. They give us the main access into the site. They ensure that the access in and out won't be impacting our roads, but rather gets cars to our major infrastructure and major interstate system. This is the process of how we're going through and making sure we have all of the input that we need going through the process. And eventually it gets to your elected officials so that they can decide if what we're putting together with the details and what the community has asked for, is it viable? Just a reminder of that. And how do we want to finance it, and what role the developer should play in financing. The process will include some envisioning like this. This is just an example of how we can imagine a detailed picturing our future together. I'm closing now. I hope your ears haven't fallen off listening to me for so long. But here's some of the concrete aspects. I want to point out the information stop there with a little icon for I for information. Go to our webpage, go to our Facebook, visit us there. Send us an email. A lot of this is going to be done through email. If you could send us your thoughts. We put 3 questions up there. They're kind of open-ended. Just tell us your general impression. What would you like to see? What concerns do you have? Send us an email. We also have on the webpage an online survey that's a little more detailed. So go to our webpage, share with your friends, share the news, let them know about all of these activities. Join us for 2 more events. May 5th, we'll have another webcast similar to this, but not on video. And then on June 11th, we're going to have our live virtual town hall where we can interact in person through media, but in real time. Thanks again. We really appreciate your time and everything that you're doing to make this a success. Bye now.